Hello and welcome to our 2020 Planet in Focus Industry Masterclass with filmmaker Liz Marshall. My name is Julian Carrington and I'm a programmer with the festival, and it is my pleasure to serve as the host for this year's Masterclass session. Liz, thank you so much for making the time to share your insights with our audience.
It's wonderful to be here. I'm a huge Planet in Focus fan. I'm part of the family since 2010.
Yeah, I suspect many of you are familiar with Liz and her work, but suffice it to say, Liz is one of Canada's foremost social advocacy filmmakers, and her feature documentaries Water on the Table, The Ghost in Our Machine, and Median Farm have all screened at previous editions of Planet in Focus. And this year, we're delighted to be continuing that tradition by presenting her latest feature, Meet the Future. Liz's films are known for their character-driven approaches to stories that address themes of environmental justice and sustainability, and Meet the Future is no exception. It follows Dr. Uma Valetti, who is the co-founder of Memphis Meats, a leader in the rapidly developing field of cell-cultured meat, which is an innovative food science that grows real meat from animal cells in a controlled and clean environment. Cell-cultured meat represents a potential revolution in food production, proposing a sustainable way to feed the world without the need to raise and slaughter animals.
Okay, great. Well, Meet the Future is actually a COVID 2020 release. It's interesting because we had our world premiere at Hot Docs during the lockdown. And here we are several months later during, I think, what is becoming a second wave. And Meet the Future, its subject matter, the timeliness of it, it's extremely topical. In a way, it's suitable that it's a COVID film. From a health pandemic perspective, in light of meat packing plants and the meat industry being in the news cycle, mainstream news cycle this year. Meet the Future is an exclusive story about a potential game-changing solution, which is why I wanted to make the film. And of course, it's challenging releasing a film during COVID. That said, it's relevant that it's part of the COVID atmosphere, climate, and discussion. So, we focus the underpinnings, the themes of the film are largely through a climate focus, also through an animal ethics focus. And I'm thrilled that it's at Planet in Focus because all of those themes are relevant to environmental justice issues. And yeah, so I'm really thrilled that it's at this festival.
And of course, we're thrilled to have it. You mentioned animal ethics and environmental justice, and in that sense, Meet the Future is very much of a piece with or continuing from your earlier feature, The Ghost in Our Machine, which we will delve into later in the discussion. But for now, I think we can expand a little bit on Meet the Future and on its timeliness and on all the ways in which it resonates in this moment as a forward-looking, solution-oriented film. I'm so curious. So actually, well, before we delve into sort of its origins, I'd just maybe like to take a moment to address also where, apart from Planet in Focus, it can be seen at the moment, because I imagine some of our viewers may want to tell other folks, friends, colleagues about it. So as you mentioned, it premiered at Hot Docs. It is screening at Planet in Focus obviously now, but where else is it available currently?
So Meet the Future is being screened on the documentary channel this month, October 2020, and it will live on GEM, so people can stream it across the country as of October 23rd. It will live there for 3 years. So that's great. I'm actually very happy about that, to have such a wide Canadian release of the film. And beyond Canada, we are on the film festival circuit, and we are working with one of the world's best sales agents, Vesna Kudik from Met Film Sales. And so she's handling, all potential sales for the film and pitching all the buyers all over the globe. So hopefully some good news coming soon about, the American release and, other territories as well. Yeah, it's a very global topic. I mean, the film itself takes place in America, and we followed the story on the ground over 3.5 years. But the subject itself is a global topic, and it will be relevant for everyone in any part of the world.
Certainly, as meat consumption continues to be a growing global phenomenon. And it's truly wonderful that it's on GEM as of later this month, because I think one of the elements of this film that is really very apparent from the outset is that it's a film that is accessible to watch. It's a film that although it's obviously got a heavy science component, it's extremely engaging and easy to connect with in terms of the subject matter. It's got a really effective balance of, it doesn't shy away from any of the details around this technology, but it makes them engaging and compelling and anything but dry. So I think it's a film that audiences will really, it will resonate with audiences. And as you say, it's so timely. In fact, I was listening to the Science Versus podcast. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but their most recent episode is on this exact topic. And in fact, they speak to Uma. So I think you're telling this story at a time, right as this technology, I think, is going to come more and more into the mainstream conversation. So it's I think very well set up to find an audience.
Absolutely. Why don't we play the first clip from Meet the Future, which is the introduction of the film. An introduction to a film is, for obvious reasons, such an important, those moments as you're being ushered into a story are critical, and for me, I love the opening of the film. So let's check it out, and then we can talk more about Meet the Future.
Great. Yeah, let's roll that.
This is the first time a meatball has ever been cooked with beef cells that did not require a cow to be slaughtered. This has been something that I've been dreaming about since I was a kid. thinking about the impact on human lives and animal lives and the ills of food production.
So you can really get a sense in that clip of the aesthetic of the film, which is very clean and again accessible. It has the feel of a technology documentary as much as it does an environmental or activist documentary. More so, in fact, I would say it comes across as a science and technology film. And I think again that will only expand the audience. We've spoken before about your interest in making a solution-oriented film, and I think that intro sets the tone. This is a forward-looking film. This is about a promising technology and about the person who is sort of spearheading one company that is making inroads into this new industry. Can you talk about why it was so important to you to come at this from a solution-oriented point of view?
Absolutely. So that's a key word for me. When I'm doing media, when I pitch the film, all through the years, trying to get the film off the ground and now releasing it into the world, solution focused is, like a flagship sort of term as a way of describing the tone, but also the motivation behind it. So, in 2013, The Ghosts in Our Machine, my last social issue documentary feature, was released widely, and it had a global impact campaign that reached more than 92 countries in a small period of time. And I actually traveled all over the world with that film, and it was reviewed globally. So we also were funded by the Doc Society to produce a global impact evaluation and a global impact report. And that was really, years of my life making and then disseminating an impact documentary and really living and breathing the dimensions of that and the social consciousness that film was part of, sort of moving the needle around the question of animal rights. At the time it was more marginal, more fringe. I would say today it's more fluent. I would say that it is more accessible as a subject matter from a moral lens, from a climate perspective lens, and philosophical lens as well. So it really opened my mind to that topic in a profound kind of way. Prior to that, of course, I cared about animals. I didn't eat animals. I was vegetarian. But in making the film, I actually became vegan, which is, for me, that was a leap. It was not a step. And I also realized that it was very important to me to make a film that was accessible. So a film that would gently remove people's blinders to see a pervasive issue that is largely hidden from our view. And to make a film that had offered the possibility of effectively removing people's blinders that would have dramatic effect, so that without, finger wagging, shaming, blaming, othering, that's not the kind of filmmaker that I am. I became obsessed with how to take a topic that most people don't want to look at, and make it a story in film form that people want to look at, that people can actually lean into, and for it to touch people's heart and mind. And we were successful at that. And that's why we did the global impact evaluation and report. And so we have those qualitative and quantitative metrics, to hang our hat on.
Right.
And that was just so illuminating. And so, but what I realized is that that is a film that does not have any easy answers, which is great, I mean, that's what life is like, often. And there's not an easy sort of actionable impact, do this, like with Blackfish, for example. It's a single issue. And it was highly impactful because it raised the question around cetaceans, so whales and dolphins in captivity, doing tricks for humans. And it impacted, sales and shareholder percentages, et cetera, at SeaWorld.
They actually suspended or stopped their orca breeding program, I believe, as a result of that film. So
yeah, it had profound impact in a very measured way. Whereas with The Ghost in Our Machine, we were like the little sister to Blackfish, released at the same time, but about this big moral complexity, which is, all animals are sentient beings that feel pain and other emotions. And that is actually scientifically proven. And, anyways, so it was important to me to then make a decision to find a story that had an active, unfolding storyline that was laser focused on a potential solution, so that it was more pointed in its focus, but also character driven, of course, because I make character driven films for so many reasons. And so when I started learning about the phenomenon of cultured meat, which is what it was called back in 2016. And then from there it moved into clean meat, and the nomenclature is very interesting. They still haven't decided on an actual term, but
that's something that you do see in Meet the Future, is them grappling with the sort of marketing aspect of this and how exactly to characterize this for consumers.
Yeah, that's right. And also from a regulatory perspective. Now, this was all very new material for me. I have never understood the birth of an industry before the way that I do now, or food production the way that I do now. But anyways, it was early 2016 that I started doing my research and learning about this. And then it was spring of 2016 that I was able to secure the exclusive behind the scenes access that you must have if you're making something like this. And I would argue, if you want to make a documentary about a person that is doing something extraordinary, you need exclusive access to that person for a limited period of time, but still, in long form documentary terms. Obviously, they should be doing as much news and journalism and media as possible. It's a win-win situation. But
yeah, absolutely.
So we were able to secure that access, and the story started from there, because that gives you the ground, the foundation to say, okay, I have this, which is a tremendous asset. It gives you that entry point into an idea, into a movement, into an emerging concept. And I've been talking about this film for so long, and it was so hard to pitch the film too. But it's becoming so mainstream now because we need solutions to our food system. And the issue of sustainability, feeding the world, environmental sanity, the topic of animal cruelty, all of these things matter. as we were sort of touching on previously, also
Yeah.
the pandemic
Mm.
has made it, you know, even more timely.
Mm.
So I would say solution focused, yes. Now, is it qualitative? Is it something that people can hang their hat on right now? Is it available to people to experience? Can people eat this meat yet? No. And the film is really a historical document,
Mm.
because whether this actually gets off the ground and is transformative the way that it promises to be is yet to be known and seen. Um, you know, indicators suggest that this will be on the market for consumers within the next couple of years,
Mhm.
and then maybe in a decade, at scale, it we will start seeing this as normative and transformative, really,
Mm.
like in a deep and in a deep way. So
Mm. So there were a couple of things that you mentioned just then that I wanted to pick up on, and also we do have a clip from Ghost that we can show in just a moment, because I think it is a useful juxtaposition to sort of look at the tone you set with the beginning of Ghost and the tone you've set with the beginning of Meet the Future. But before we get into that clip from Ghost, there were two things that I wanted to maybe touch on, you know, mindful of our audience and, you know, folks who are filmmakers themselves, you know, and looking at ways to approach stories. You mentioned the sort of media availability that Uma is you know, he's undergoing at the moment. He's trying to launch this undertaking, and so of course he's doing a lot of press. And you are able to work that very organically into the film. You know, you do have a few sort of two-camera interviews with him, but oftentimes you're sort of following him, sometimes literally down a hallway as he's being, you know, interviewed by the BBC, or you're catching him, you know, as he's recording something, you know, remotely. And I find that gives, again, the film sort of a forward momentum and a dynamism. You know, you don't have to break it up with these more traditional interviews. So can you talk about that being a strategy for you, sort of taking
oh
advantage
yeah,
of the media that Uma was doing organically?
yeah. I'm happy that you are focusing on that, and I would, yes, I'm so happy to talk about it. So in making a character-driven film, it's a challenge because because I mean, character-driven storytelling is my passion, first of all.
Mm.
But when you're exploring and unveiling, revealing, educating the public about a new idea or a new way of seeing the world, um, you have to also be able to have critical distance from the immersion and the intimacy of character-driven storytelling. You have to step out and back and have a wider lens. I mean that figuratively and literally.
Right.
And it's also important, I think, with a topic like this one, that other voices are included, so that there is an intellectual, there's an intellectual obligation, I believe, with a film like this, to include the opinions or the questions of the general public. And I am a little bit allergic to or adverse to just having a talking heads format,
Mm.
you know, cutting away to another talking head and then cutting
Mhm.
away to another talking head. And it was not possible to be in situ to capture those dynamic or controversial moments while following Uma. Sometimes the environments were so controlled that it was posing a problem, that
Mm.
we just were not getting that other side or those other bigger questions or ideas or opinions. So I thought, okay, I think I know how I want to tackle this. And it was exactly what you were just mentioning. It was, okay, I am going to include the voice of the press media because there's so much coverage on this topic. And so we worked with an amazing, director of graphics and animation, and we were able to put together strong editorial sequences. You just saw it in the intro. That was
Mm-hmm.
that's the first one, but there's others in the film. And then also situations where there are journalists on the ground and they're there wanting to interview Uma or someone else. I thought, just follow that. Just be with those moments, because those journalists will ask smart questions that the audience is also asking in their own mind.
Right.
And so it's a device. It's like it absolutely is a technique to have more of a collection of questions throughout the film. And so, some people might say the film doesn't include enough of, the other side or whatever. What is the other side, though? The other side, you could say, is the conventional meat industry, but they're invested in this.
Right.
In fact, that was one of the greatest twists and turns in the film. That was so exciting because it was dramatic and we didn't see it coming. And that is in 2017, just a year after, we're following this story. Memphis Meats, that's Uma's company, startup company. They announce that they have secured, millions of dollars, and that Tyson and Cargill, two of the largest meat industry companies, are stakeholders in his company, and Bill Gates and Richard Branson and other, financiers. So it was a really interesting moment because it became more complex. You realize these are not disruptors taking on a giant villain. It's rather, these are pioneers, innovating the next big idea. And its time has come, obviously, and something that we didn't even know. Like in 2016, there was no way for me to have any certainty.
Right.
I had the instinct to do it. I had the passion and determination to do it. And I just followed that. But it could have dissolved. It could have, faded away. Memphis Meats could have, so you take risks. You take big risks when you make a documentary. And that was just one of them.
Well, and so I'm the second question that occurred to me as you were speaking earlier, and actually it relates to some things you were saying just then, which is, we talked about the intense media coverage around Uma and around Memphis, and also the investment that it attracted, and yet you found that this was a difficult story to pitch. So what were the challenges that you had in pitching the film, despite the obvious way in which this subject matter was sort of primed to connect with audiences and become a big story?
So the challenge, I would say, is some potential buyers would say, that's fascinating, but why are you focusing on one person, one company? Why don't you do a survey and jump around the globe and talk to other startups that are also emerging in the space? And my answer to that is that the immersion and the privilege of following one co-founder and CEO and his teeny tiny startup company, to me, that is a stand-in for all the others. And it allows you to build the trust with those people, with that cast of characters, and to have that exclusivity that, is so important. But also, I wasn't really interested in a survey. style for this film. I think the immersion, that intimate, more humanizing approach of focusing on an individual and his team, is a more effective way of communicating what motivates people to do what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so that was one question. The other question was, how is this not a commercial for a company? And that's such a legitimate, important question. And it became sort of my MO. And I found myself repeating it over and over again to Memphis Meats and Uma. You know, this is not a commercial. This is not a promotional tool. This is a film, right? And what does that mean? It means that, you know, you're not always going to look glossy or glitzy, or, I need to be behind the scenes and see those in between moments that are not always scripted or staged or whatever. And it's about process. It's not about outcome. So it's about capturing something over time, as opposed to just the unveiling of something.
Right.
So
I'm curious, what was Uma's response to that? Because I can imagine that, you know, obviously he's in a moment where he would probably prefer to be able to control precisely, you know, what the public is learning about Memphis. And so what was that conversation like with him?
It was important, and it was challenging, but he understood and he respected. But it was, a story like this has a lot of intellectual property associated with it, because it is such a novel innovation. And then they have all those stakeholders, right? So protecting his IP is his, as a CEO, is his number one priority, right? And at the same time, he let me in, and I knew, and we had the trust, and we built that relationship over time, that my access was unprecedented. Of course, you know, journalists would come and go within reason, you know, like Fortune magazine, you know, or Inc. magazine, or, you know, there's so many. He's on CNN and all kinds of different outlets all the time. But they, you know, they never got to see the things that we were filming, ever. So it was a privilege, and I learned a lot about that world, you know, the startup world.
How long did it take you to build that rapport with Uma? How did you sort of approach that relationship from the get-go?
Well, it was ongoing. So that trust and relationship building happens throughout the course of the entire production process, and also post-production, because he knew that, you know, we're not showing him rough cuts and assemblies, and they don't have editorial control at all.
Right.
So it was a risk for them, for sure. And I think that he understood, or, you know, he was able to see, especially over time, and especially now, that I'm ethical in my, I take this very seriously. Like, I don't make exposés. I don't, that relationship with a protagonist, a central participant, is everything. Everything hinges on it, and I have respect for what they are doing. So, you know, it's a very different style film than The Ghosts in Our Machine. The Ghosts in Our Machine is about empathy, whereas I think Meet the Future is more intellectual.
Right.
And it's meant to reach a wider audience, which I believe it will, and I believe it is. But The Ghosts in Our Machine has a really powerful core audience. You know, with The Ghosts in Our Machine, my obsession was how to make a film that could offer a new way of seeing the world. And the way of seeing the world is through the lens of a main character, Joanne MacArthur, an animal rights photographer, who views animals as people, as fellow beings, as moral beings who have a right to live and enjoy their lives. And so that was just so such a unique passageway, because through her photography we meet the animals, and through her mission to have her work published widely around the world as a photojournalist, we come to understand sort of a David and Goliath kind of paradigm. And we also meet the animals, and we get to, and the film gives those animals a certain amount of agency, actually equal agency to the people in the film. And that was the whole point, was to include the animals as part of a cast of characters. And it was effective because by experiencing animals as sentient beings, I think people were and are, it's still, the film is still seen around the world. People are invited to consider their own behaviors, their own choices, and just how pervasive and how complicit we are in these industries that are, hidden from our view. And so it's a big question. And then Meet the Future, I think, is also a big concept, because it's a big new idea, but it's more pragmatic, it's more tangible, it's more tactile in a way, because it's underway.
Right. Is this maybe a good moment to show our clip from Ghost, so that
Sure.
Yeah, great. Okay, so let's cue that up in just a second here.
The question of morality as it relates to the human-animal relationship is a huge question. It's the next big hurdle of social moral development that humans need to cross. I say next because it's already underway. We're becoming much more aware of that.
By any of the data. The fact is that all animals are sentient, and humans are animals. And we share the basic property of emotions, pleasure, and pain with other animals.
Psychological that make up that spectrum of experience that we call sentience. Sentience means the capacity to feel. It really refers to a whole spectrum of feelings, from the agony of the worst sorts of pain to the ecstasy of the best sorts of pleasure. The sentient beings ourselves.
The science is there, and it is growing by the minute. And we are deliberately ignoring it because it is inconvenient to recognize it. Sentience is a concept.
Emotional research is. Now, animals definitely have emotions, but that doesn't mean that they're people. There's one big thing in the brain that separates people from animals, the size of cortex. We've got raw computer power that animals don't have. Animals are not going to fly to the moon. Intellect is what separates people from animals, not emotion.
It really is the solution to all our ills. Someone once said that animals are another nation. They're not aliens, they're not property, they're not dangers, but rather they're other beings with whom we share life, who have as vested an interest in their own lives as we do. All we need to do is make certain that we don't become the plague, the vermin that takes it all over, but rather make sure that there's always room for them, because without them, we'd be one hell of a lonely place.
feel like I'm a war photographer and I'm photographing history. I'm photographing changes in history right now in terms of animal rights and where it's going.
So just after this moment, the introduction to the film, Joanne is in a meeting and she's discussing the opportunity to publish some of the photos that she's taken of animals being kept in cages and in these conditions that are heart-wrenching. And there's a discussion about whether publications are going to be receptive to these issues because they're mindful of images that may be challenging to viewers. And I think this is obviously an issue that you, I'm sure, confronted yourself in making and releasing this film, was addressing subject matter that is uncomfortable for people and that in some way has the potential to implicate them and kind of prompt them to evaluate their own ethics and their own moral stances. And there's another film actually in the PIF lineup this year called The Viewing Booth that is addressing a very similar set of questions. It is investigating the effect that social issue documentaries or nonfiction imagery that aims to persuade viewers the issues that you can encounter with the sort of psychological defense mechanisms that people employ when they encounter images or video that again sort of makes them uncomfortable or that implicates their own ethics. So I'm wondering, what was your experience in bringing ghosts into the world? We've talked earlier about the impact campaign that it had, so I imagine obviously it was in some ways very effective, but I also imagine you had a sense of there must have been some viewers that found it difficult to engage with the subject matter.
During the making of the film, I was very aware of precisely this topic. And that was it was like a guiding principle for me. I always thought about it, we labored over it. I worked with such a great team, and it was, we had this discussion countless times. And the goal of the film is to invite you to not look away, is to invite you to lean in as opposed to turn away from something that is an inconvenient truth that makes people uncomfortable because we're all complicit. Most people in the world eat meat. Most people wear animal products, buy products. A lot of, most of our medicine is tested on animals. It goes on and on. The entertainment that we consume has often used animals. So it is such a pervasive topic that in my own research, development, production phase of making the film, and during the post-production, and then during the dissemination, it was just a layered experience for me in understanding the gravitas and my obsession with wanting to create something that invited people to not look away, to invite people to consider a new way of seeing the world, to remove people's blinders gently with dramatic effect. And so I feel like we were successful in achieving that. Of course, no film can find the perfect balance for everybody. There's lots of people, including friends and family, that won't watch it because they assume that, because they're terrified because they love animals. They love animals. Most people love animals. Most people love their companion animals or wildlife. But The Ghosts in Our Machine is a self-reflexive title that invites us to go, oh, it's my machine. And the ghosts are these billions of animals that, you know, are the bits and parts and ingredients in so many of the things that, you know, products that we consume and we choose or want to remain unconscious about. And so the film challenges our moral compass. And that's a really hard thing to do. And whether it does that for, you know, because there's lots of people who saw it and thought it's too gentle. It's not, I need to be smashed over the head. I need to, and so then I would always say, watch Earthlings, watch which is an incredibly important film that is narrated by Joaquin Phoenix. And it came out in 2006. And it's essentially the same philosophical, moral question, but done in a way that is totally uncensored and in your face. And from start to finish, you experience the reality. And no, that's not manipulative, because it's truth. But will you watch it? You know, that's the question, right? So yeah, it's really hard. And there's a lot of other topics in the world that you can draw a very similar equation to. I'm not suggesting that this is the only topic, but it is a big one when you really delve into the magnitude of this topic and the complexity of it. It is a unique and fascinating topic.
And so I wonder what lessons did you take from your experience with ghosts into Meet the Future?
Lots. I mean, you hope that every new film, your latest film, is more evolved in some way, shape, or form. I think that The Ghosts in Our Machine is the most emotionally dramatic film that I've ever made. I think it has the most impact on the emotional level. Because like I said earlier, I think Meet the Future is more conceptual and intellectual because it's about something that is still theoretical. Yet it is not a utopian aspiration. It is underway, and it's an intimate, deep dive with the pioneers and game changers who are bringing this to the world. So
was that a very deliberate choice on your part to, you know, having made a film that plays to the emotions, to then choose to make something more cerebral and more intellectual?
Yes, because The Ghosts in Our Machine, our audience is widely female. And yet when you look at the statistics around meat eating, it's mostly men that eat meat. Of course, there, you know, I'm not suggesting that, but there's more women that are vegetarian. There's more women that are vegan. So I thought that was another conscious choice. You know, most of the people in the film are men. A lot of my films have focused on women. I wanted to do something different. And so I think that it has the opportunity to meet, to reach more meat eaters.
Okay, so this was a very considered undertaking in all regards. Maybe this is a good opportunity for us to go back to Uma, because you're talking about, this is a film that features a male character, which is new for you. And so how did Uma's story, why was it important for you to have that human dimension in addition to, as opposed to making a survey film, as some of these, funders suggested might be the way to go here? Why was it so important for you to ground it in Uma's story?
Because these big ideas need to be humanized. They need to be relatable, especially the topic of meat or meat innovation, or whatever you want to call it, cultured meat, cultivated meat, clean meat, cell-based meat. It needs to be humanized. It needs to be grounded and anchored through a human lens. So Uma is the perfect entry point from my point of view, because for many reasons. When I met him, I was so moved by his personal story. So he grew up in the south of India, where he was born and raised, and he emigrated to the US as a young man to study cardiology at the Mayo Clinic. He then went on to become a very successful American cardiologist. And in 2015, he took, a very passion-driven, risky career turn and co-founded Memphis Meats with his co-founder, Nicholas Genovese, who's a stem cell biologist. And it was a huge risk, and it took an emotional toll on Uma, which we see and experience in the film, because family is everything to him, which is also an important part of the storytelling, as we get to also meet and get to know his wonderful partner in life, his wife, Mrinalini. She's also a doctor. And I love the subtext of Uma being an immigrant. That's an immigrant story. He is now, someone that will go down in history as a pioneer. And could he even consider or hope for, the possibility to move to the US to do what he's done and what he's doing? No way. So I love that subject.
Under the current administration.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. Thank you. I like that subtext. It's never really addressed in a direct way, but it's self-evident. It's inherent in the story. And we actually go back to India with him to visit his family and to understand his roots. That was such an important shoot to get in the can, to film him there. Why? I had to really convince him because, he's a private person, and yet here he was being followed around by a film crew. So he understood the value, and he understood why, and he graciously opened that door for us. And that scene, which we'll watch a clip from right now, is just so important to understand, like I said, the humanizing component of making a character-driven film.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's cue that up.
I would say coming to India feels like connecting back with the roots of where the idea came from. When I was 12 years old, there was a party for one of my friends in this neighborhood. It was a birthday party. There was a lot of people, music, dancing, and there was a lot of food. And I just happened to walk to the back of the home where they were making the food, where I saw the animals, chickens, being slaughtered. It was an experience where I saw intense and, true happiness in the front of the home where we were celebrating my friend's birthday. And then I walked back, and then there was this moment where that happiness was being supported by ending life. And that was very hard for me. And it was just this feeling in me that how, as humans, we were incredibly capable of having a lot of joy, fun, generosity. And on the other side, there was this stark reality of, ending life. There was a birthday on one side, and there was a death day on the other side, and it was happening at the same time.
That's a different choice.
Obviously, as a kid, I thought, why don't we all stop eating meat? And that is a solution that is on the table always. And I really certainly hope that that's also a solution that is seriously considered by all of us.
And again, just after this sequence, you see Uma return to his, I believe it's his high school, where he addresses an audience of current students, and you really get a sense of the inspirational potential that he represents to to a next generation of young people growing up in his hometown. So that's certainly another area in which that subtext that you mentioned, you really do, you don't hammer it home by any means, but it's you get it. It's right there. You see, what the trail that Uma is blazing. I'm curious, so in researching the topic, at what point did you, when you first heard of Memphis, did you hear of it sort of in parallel with Uma's personal story, or how did you discover his personal story?
So I learned about it, when they unveiled the world's first little meatball in early 2016, and I was fascinated. The light bulb for me went off right away. I didn't feel repulsed by it. I thought, oh, wow, that is interesting. And who is this person? And who is this company? And I did my research, but also a friend of mine, Bruce Friedrich, who's also in the film,
right.
Introduced me to Uma. So it was through that introduction and the initial phone call with Uma, he jumped on the idea. He loved the idea that a Canadian team would want to follow the story of his little tiny, massive idea that they're trying to get off the ground. So then I flew down there in the spring of 2016 to actually meet him in person and meet his small team, and hired a local crew. And we did some filming, not knowing whether it would make it into the film, but I knew it would, because they had just moved into their first facility. And so there were boxes everywhere, and it was empty, really. And it's just important to storytelling that you are able to chart something over time. It's also hard to stay with a story over 3.5 years.
Right.
But for this idea, this project, it was essential. And so thankfully, the documentary channel came on board in 2017, and they understood that I needed to follow it over time, and that it wouldn't be a sort of 1 year of production, 6 to 8 months of post delivery timeline, but that it was an extended timeline. And they understood, and they were behind that.
Who were your other financing partners on the project?
So, Canadian pots of money, because of the Canadian broadcaster, and then the Redford Center in the US. I was part of 2 very valuable cohorts as part of this film. The Redford Center cohort, so they came in during development, and then they came on board. I won one of the grants. They give out 2 grants.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I was so fortunate. And they are just such good friends. I'm, part of that family now. It's wonderful. And then also the inaugural Climate Story Lab that took place in New York City in the summer of 2018. They chose Meet the Future as one of the 12 international projects. Wow. And that is that's a Doc Society and Exposure Labs initiative. And it was amazing. It was a whole week in New York. We were in early post at that point, so it was valuable. Yeah, it was valuable.
I can imagine. And how did you? So you talked about the importance of following the story over time, and Documentary Channel were aligned with that. How did you know where you would draw this story to a close?
Well, deadlines are good to have. So, right. We had some hard deliverables and deadlines. That's always helpful. I'm all for that. And if you need to stretch those boundaries, I'm all for that. I'm all for advocating, you know, the reasons why. But 3.5 years was perfect because you'll see in the film that one of the final scenes, they're actually scouting their first potential production facility, which would be like a prototype. And the first production facility in the world for this. And then I'm so glad that we actually got that on camera, because after we locked the film in early February of 2020, they announced to the world that they had just raised, I believe, $167 million towards that production facility. So, you know, their story continues. Ours is locked in time, but it's like a historical document because it's like being on the ground at the genesis phase of something.
Right.
Yeah.
You've captured that phase of their story, which is
yeah.
It's
And of course,
yeah.
the next phase is when other filmmakers will jump in, because they'll suddenly go, "Hey, let's follow that," you know. And so there'll be a part 2, which is once this is regulated and it's on the market,
right,
and people are able to actually access it, eat it, and then what happens? You know, there's all kinds of hurdles and challenges moving forward, like scalability, affordability, all those things.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I'm mindful of our time here, and I think by way of beginning to draw this conversation to a close, we talked a little bit earlier about some of your takeaways from Ghosts, and I'm wondering now, you know, obviously Meet the Future is still waiting to meet most of its audience, but I'm wondering what are, you know, I'm sure there are so many, as you said there were with Ghosts, but what are 1 or 2 sort of key takeaways that you would want to share with an audience, again, of filmmakers, of folks who are, you know, about to embark on projects of their own, or who may be, you know, already pursuing topics that they want to make films about? What are some sort of key lessons you would say that you took away from this experience?
I think the key lessons are questions, you know, things to really consider and to look at from every angle. And, you know, what is the answer? I think it depends on the project. I think some of the key challenges in making this film were, you know, and you actually talked about this initially. It's science, it's technology, it's climate justice, it's animal ethics, it's, you know, the story of a pioneer. It's all of those things. How do you take, which can be cumbersome in a way, because, you know, what is it? Is it a science film? Is it an environmental film? Is it the story of a pioneer? Is it a biography? What is it? And so I think for me, with my films, I exist in sort of a liminal space, trying to bring these underpinnings and approaches and themes together. And, you know, whether or not that works for everyone or not, of course it's not going to work for everyone. It seems to be the language and the signature that I'm applying to my work. And I think this is a process. And I don't think that you make those decisions at the onset of something. I think that they torment you, those questions, every step of the way. You know, you know, you're awake at night wondering, is this a science film, a technology film? Is it a story about a pioneer? Is it an environmental film? Is it an animal rights film? What is it? Because all those things, it's everything. And so when you're dealing with something that is everything, which often our films are, they're microcosms of, you know, a convergence of issues and emotional themes, intellectual ideas. that is the challenge of piecing these ecosystems together. And so I don't know the answer to that. I just know for myself that you can't stop thinking about that. You can't stop interrogating your own methodology along the way, and getting feedback and working with the right people to actualize and bring to life what it is that you're needing to do. So I think the strengths of this film, I mean, time will tell as well. I'm still very fresh with it. But I think the strength of the film is the timeliness of it. I think the character access, that there was no way of knowing that Uma Valetti would become a pioneer, that yeah, someone that, you know, makes it to the front cover of Inc. magazine in 2000, you know, like his rise in prominence as a CEO became part of the story, because that's what happened. And there was no way of knowing. So, you know, I think that this film has all kinds of strengths and pillars to it. And there's also, I think there's weaknesses to it. And the weaknesses are, you know, the complexity of following an idea that largely exists in a petri dish or under a microscope. And how do you translate that in a way that's dynamic for an audience? Right? That is hard to do. So I think that, and maybe I'll be the one to do a part two. When it becomes more dynamic, it's when it's actually in the hands of people. And it is food. And then we're looking at, you know, the implications of that. That's a whole different story to be told. So we had to walk many fine lines in how do we make a dynamic story that is about something that you see in the film. You see these young, brilliant scientists going, we're at the edge of this frontier. We have no idea what we're doing. Like, and I love that, right? I don't have any idea what I'm doing either, you know, like I do and I don't. So I think this is a masterclass, and I would say that that is my message is, yes, you have to know what you're doing. And at then there's a whole area that you can't know. You cannot know, you know, and you have to embrace that and walk with that and hold both as the reality of making these stories that take years and live in the world and touch people's lives and hopefully create the social change and impact and consciousness that you hope it can have that effect.
I'm wondering, have you had maybe this can be the question that we can draw to a close on, because it is forward looking. I'm wondering, you talk about those questions that you've been asking yourself. What is this film? Now that the film is finished and you're looking to get it out into the world, have those different sort of subject matter categories, those access points, have those turned into an asset? Have you been talking to, you know, your sales agent about how there are all of these vectors by which audiences could come to this story?
Yes. And so we're waiting for, you know, the right buyer who gets it. You know, I think right now in terms of our COVID landscape, in terms of, you know, what are the buyers sinking themselves into? They want, this is still a theoretical topic.
Right.
So for example, some buyers want, you know, content that is immediately accessible and tangible for audiences as a takeaway. Whereas this is not that quite yet. However, it is so timely and topical for all the reasons that we've discussed over this Zoom class. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's, I mean, it must be such a bittersweet set of emotions for you to have finally finished this years-long journey of making the film and to be poised to bring it into the marketplace, and then to have the disruption of COVID, obviously, which has been a disruption in every facet of our lives. But for the filmmakers who are poised to share stories, it's such an unpredictable set of circumstances. And certainly where I sit in my day job with Hot Docs and looking at the distribution landscape, things are really just so in flux at the moment, and we're seeing opportunities created, but also disruption. And yeah, it's an interesting point you make about buyers looking for content that is sort of immediate, or something that well, to be honest, I have to say, I would think that in some ways your film is nonetheless perfectly positioned, because it is so engaging and thought-provoking. It's not the sort of documentary that I've been told by some distributors and so on, that people are looking for diversions. They're not necessarily looking for films that are darker or heavier, because obviously we've had plenty of that in 2020. But your film is so, again, it's so engaging. It's not. I mean, it's when I say I don't think your film is challenging. I don't mean that to suggest that it's not. Again, sort of intellectually challenging. There's so much to think about, but it's not a film that is. We've talked so much about how accessible it is. It isn't a film that I think is hard to get your head around, and it just sort of opens you up to this possibility, this potential solution. So yeah, I would think that the timeliness of it, the way that it engages you, the way that it invites you to think about what's next, I think that that's very much what an audience would be looking for in this moment. And certainly that's why we are so pleased to be presenting it at Planet in Focus this year. So we certainly wish you and the film all the best in finding the biggest audience out there, because it we think it utterly deserves it.
Oh, thank you so much. I believe it will. I think it might just be a bit of a timing issue, but I believe it will find its way. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And maybe on that note, I will thank you, Liz, for being with us and being so generous with your time and sharing all of your insights. It's been really fascinating to get a window into this journey that you've been on for the past 4 years. So thank you so much again for this discussion.
Great. Thanks, Julian. Great questions. Good to see you.
And you.
Take care, everyone.
And thank you all for tuning in.